grassroots, it is my privilege and honor to have one of these women join us today, Jody Williams, a lifelong advocate of freedom, self-determination, peace, and human and civil rights. And, by the way, the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize for her work to ban landmines through the International Campaign to Ban Landmines, for which she received the prize in 1997. She is also an author of a memoir about her life as a grassroots activist. And the name of that book is My Name is Jody Williams, A Vermont Girl's Winding Path to the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm also honored to have joining me in this conversation another recognized global visionary who is committed to alleviating poverty, ending world hunger, supporting social justice, and environmental sustainability. The author of The Soul of Money and a close friend and colleague, Lynne Twist. Welcome, Jody and Lynne. So first, Jody, it's great to connect. We had such a rich conversation. I hope we can just kind of jump back in. So let's start with the beginning a little bit. So how does one start from kind of indignation, social activism, and get to a Nobel Peace Prize winner? How does it happen?
First of all, if one is doing their work in order to receive the Peace Prize, they don't deserve it. Okay.
Well said.
In my life, what first inspired me to question pretty much everything was the Vietnam War, which I was against. My first protest was at the University of Vermont in May of 1971, a long, long time ago. But it was that experience. It was, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and the civil rights movement. It was the reemergence of the women's movement. All of the social bubbling and boiling and change that was trying to happen at that period. And it, as I said, woke me up. And then after Vietnam, I knew that I had to try to do something to change US foreign policy, its interventionist and militaristic view of how to deal with the world. Like any graduate of university, I floundered. I ended up as a temporary assistant to an oral surgeon. I worked as a temporary secretary, thinking, wow, I'll find the spot to work. But it wasn't that. It was the US intervention in Central America in the 1980s that, brought me to full-time activism. And it was to try to stop the war, or US involvement in the war, and mitigate the impact on the impoverished, illiterate civilians that were being targeted by the Salvadoran military. And that's what got me back into it, and I've never stopped since.
Yeah. So I want to follow up, and then I'm going to ask Lynne, who knows you well, to guide some of the questioning here. But we were talking earlier this week, something that really struck me is that you said the time in Central America was really quite frustrating. And you pointed out that you felt like it was a failure. And you came back to the States. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think, we live in a moment right now where there's a sense of both optimism and great fear that we're going to not harness this moment of, social change that is just before us, that's been catalyzed by the most recent activities and the pain of them.
Mm-hmm. I was naive. I started volunteering for an organization supporting Salvador work in the US when I was a full-time teacher at Antioch College. So I'd work all day teaching, and then I would go a few nights a week. It started to volunteer, stuffing envelopes, and all of the boring but necessary work that we did in those days before email and the web and all of that. And the more I did, the more I wanted to do. But I also believed very strongly in coalition work. And the organization that I was volunteering with at that time only wanted to focus on Salvador. which I found short-sighted in the sense that US policy was toward the region overall. So if you just pulled one part out, I felt like you were not thinking clearly enough to try to really strategize how to respond to US military intervention. The organization remained fixed on Salvador, but that was pretty much how it was in those days. There was the Guatemalan organization, there was a Salvador organization, Nicaragua organization, and trying to get coordinated activity was not particularly easy, but I still, in my guts, felt it was necessary. And that's what ultimately, helped shape me when I started working on the campaign to ban landmines. Because I built a coalition, I started it. It was 2 NGOs, one in Germany, one in the US, so I could call it the International Campaign to Ban Landmines, and a staff of 1, which was me. And we grew to 1,300 non-governmental organizations in 90 countries. And within the space of 5 years, achieved a treaty banning anti-personnel landmines, which in the diplomatic world is like rocketing into space. It was so fast. It was pretty amazing, but it was because of all of the tens of thousands of people who contributed their talents and in their own way to bring about this change.
So how do you as a leader hold both the kind of passion and clear, as I'm getting to know you, indignation about injustice, while also bringing people in and holding a coalition that can be quite different in their motivations? How do you do that?
Sorry, it's hard to say. No, to me, in building that campaign, the landmine campaign, it was very clear that, very few of the organizations were specific to landmines, right? It was Human Rights Watch, it was UNICEF, it was Mines Action Canada, it was NGO demining organizations, and each brought their own skills, talent, expertise to create the whole. Human Rights Watch is like a law firm, practically, and they brought in a lot of the legal to argue against anti-personnel landmines. Physicians, I can't think of the name right now, which is terrible. And then, of course, the deminers, and then the Handicap International of France that worked with survivors, with amputees. So we came to know more, in all honesty, about every aspect of the landmine problem than any of the countries that were involved in the negotiations. And I truly believe in honesty and certainty. If you say you're going to do something, you do it. If you say you will not do something, you do not do it. And all of that in our campaign helped build, in the beginning, a shaky trust between the NGOs and governments, to seriously governments coming to us all the time for information about landmines and what was their impact, et cetera, et cetera. But they knew that even though we disagreed, we would tell our truth and would not bend it to make them happy, et cetera, et cetera. In the campaign, we also invited, as I said a little bit earlier, the individual talents of people. I think of one in particular, her name is Dalma from Hungary. And Dalma could cook up a slogan, like a 6-word slogan that could capture the essence of what the issue of the day was in the campaign. And we were in an impasse at one point in Geneva in the negotiations, and Dalma captured what the impasse was in 6 words, stood outside the entrance door to the Palais And whenever a diplomat would come through the door, she would say it, but she would also give a slip of paper slogan, and everybody in the room knew what it was, knew what it stood for. And I could never have done that to save my life. Dalma did it with grace and humor, and it had a huge impact.
I just have to interrupt. Can you just go back for a second? Your video froze just as you were talking about the paper being given, and I think we missed the punchline there.
Well, just she would say it. She would give each diplomat a little slip of, like a fortune cookie thing, saying what the slogan was. And then by the time the meeting opened in the morning, everyone in the room knew the slogan of the day, understood the political point that it was referencing. And it got so intense that some diplomats would just rush past her and refuse to even acknowledge her presence or take the slogan.
She's that pushy one that's going to get the slogan in front of it.
That's one small example, but for example, the deminers built a fake minefield. One point I got so frustrated at all of these men in suits sitting in Geneva looking at Mont Blanc as they discussed whether or not to change a comma to a semicolon in the draft language, and thinking it was a hell of a work day because they managed to change it. And I wanted to pick up the entire room and carry it to the biggest minefield in Cambodia and set it down and not show them the safe routes out until they negotiated a treaty. Obviously, we could not do that. So the deminers built a fake minefield, and it had sensors under the ground, but the platform they built, and straw and stones, etc., and put it right in front of the conference room door so that everybody would have to walk through the minefield to get into the conference room. And if they hit a sensor, it would blow up, and it was scary. Even though you knew that it was not a landmine, it still shook you, and it made you think about, whoa, are living this every day. And we had amputees from 5 or 6 different countries deliver 1 million signatures from around the world calling for a ban on landmines. Just all of these things to make it present and real.
Let me ask you a question, and I'm going to ask Lynne to tee up something. But in the New York Times, either this morning or yesterday, things blur together. There was a very powerful piece about how this extraordinary moment in our nation's history, where there is, and we talked about this earlier this week, civil society at its absolute best, just private action for public good, collectively making a stance. Incredible, long overdue solidarity across white, Black, multicultural, men, women, LGBTQ, et cetera, just the whole community standing. And they talked about this being powerful in not having a leader or a set of leaders, that there's this self-organizing, and that's the beauty of it. I'm interested in your take, because you also had an organization that was playing a role. And to get a treaty, an international treaty set up, it strikes me that there's, the way you're describing it, a little bit of both and. So I'm interested to hear how that.
Our campaign had a steering committee, and it started out with the 6 organizations that came together to decide to publicly launch a campaign. And it grew as the campaign grew in order to reflect the campaign in Cambodia, the campaign in Afghanistan, et cetera. But it was sort of a governing body. That sounds too intense, because we didn't tell anyone what to do, but we came up with strategies for 6 months and a year. And we offered the plan to all the campaigners, and those who wanted to could participate in it. And those who it didn't fit their culture, it didn't fit their timing or whatever, did not have to participate in any of the actions laid out. So that people who participated did it because they wanted to, because they saw what it would do for them and their campaign and the country they were living in with landmines. But in all honesty, I do not believe that any effort without some sort of leadership structure, even if totally informal, can strategize for change. If you're trying to change across a nation, one certainly has to organize at the local level with local police. But it's also, as we know, a problem since the very beginning of this country, and it has to be addressed also nationally. And I do not see, maybe somebody can enlighten me and I'd be very interested. I do not see how a long-term project for change can actually help, not help, but push forward serious change without having some sort of structure that, you know, puts ideas together, shares the ideas, etc. I think there's too much worry about, oh my God, if we have a leader, the leader will get all the credit. In the campaign, we just weren't that way. I'm not that way. I never promote myself. I always, in the campaign, have talked about we, not me. If somebody starts saying I this, I that, I the other, then I don't really want to talk to them, because it's happened to their thinking and they've lost the grounding in the we that is fundamental to change. But we were always we, and we matters, not I.
Lost the we that is fundamental to change. I just gotta call that out. So Lynne, I've had the pleasure of knowing you now for a number of years. And so I have to ask, how did you get, first of all, connected to Jody? And kind of you sit on this also international perch. What are you taking away? How do you think about Jody's work and the work of the Nobel Peace Prize women?
Well, first of all, thank you for having us be part of this beautiful Upswell pop-up series. And thank you, Dan, for your leadership of independent sector. And I just got to say, before I answer your question, how critical civil society is right now. Mm-hmm. And that independent sector is this mycelium network underneath civil society, empowering and not overpowering, but underneath empowering civil society is just like vital to what's going on in the United States. So it's just so fantastic to be having this conversation right now on this day, and then to have it with Jody, who before there was an internet, before we had all these tools we have, before we had cell phones, I mean, really just a miracle of coordination and collaboration that was not only worthy of a Nobel Prize, but actually made a historic milestone that just so game-changing. And I would say that, so I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time when the Nobel Women's Initiative, the Nobel women who won the Nobel Prize, Jody really being the primary realizer of this, realized that there are enough women who won the Nobel Prize after, 100 years of men getting it over and over and over again. When we really think about who are the peacemakers, they're really women. That there were enough, a handful of them who had won the Nobel Peace Prize, that maybe they could do something together. And I'm sure Jody would love to tell that story, but I can't even really say anything more specific than I was in the right place at the right time when it was starting to gel through the Fetzer Institute, which is a sponsor of Upswell and these conversations. We had funded, the Fetzer Institute is also a foundation, a gathering of Nobel laureates, men and women, and I was there, and this coming together of the women was sort of happening, and I got invited to participate, and then somehow I ended up being useful to Jody and her team, and began, was invited to a strategy session, actually conducted the strategy session that kind of helped define what Nobel Women's Initiative, which is the organization that Jody founded, could come into existence and bring the cachet, the visibility, the power of the Nobel Prize given to women to take that power and apply it to grassroots women's organizations around the world. And Jody, hopefully you'll talk about that. But I just wanted to say that one of the things that I think is going on right now, and I'm going to use this opportunity to say it, is in the 20th century, really charity became a very important part of what was happening. You know, I worked with Mother Teresa. She was she's the icon of charity. The 21st century is not about charity. It's almost abolishing charity. It's about solidarity. And Jody's work prior to the beginning of the 21st century was an example of solidarity, not charity. She didn't work from having people feel sorry for the landmine victims or pity them, but actually see the power of solidarity, with that we're all whole and complete human beings working together. We can produce anything, like miraculous results. And I feel that solidarity, like, you know, today, June 5th, in our country, and it makes me cry, the solidarity that's rising, not charity, not feeling sorry for. I hope we're done with that, actually, as a human family, but the solidarity that's rising. And Jody, you as a feisty fighter, make it happen gal, you know that there's this particular quality about women's leadership that I want to acknowledge and invite you to talk about, if you would, that you saw was part of what wanted to happen in the world when you founded the Nobel Women's Initiative. And Dan, if it's okay, I'd love for Jody to just talk about the quality of women's leadership, what women bring to the table, to the party, to the peace talks, to the initiatives, that has a particularly quality where collaboration is more natural. It's more about we instead of me. It's not about competing, but there's still fight and energy and commitment and feistiness. I mean, Jody, you exemplify that. But I just love that that's one of the things that you recognized and brought into visibility with Nobel Women's Initiative, which we call NWI. Can you talk about that?
Sure. I think that left to our own devices, women do tend to come together to either support the people around them, to fight for vestiges of peace during conflict, to support their sisters who have been raped and re-raped as a tactic of war. And in that sense, we're different. And we're not better necessarily, although I am proud to say that Archbishop Tutu and His Holiness the Dalai Lama individually and separately said that men have messed up the world since the beginning of time. They should step aside and let women clean it up. And we keep trying. But woo, sure, it was Shirinabadi and I, was November of 2004. And we were there for a giant global landmine meeting. And Wangari Maathai of Kenya had just been named the Nobel recipient for 2004. So Shirin and I were talking and she said, you know, we have a handful of women. We should do something together, you know, to support women's human rights, which of course, women's human rights are no different from any human's rights. But I loved the idea. I knew that together we could do something. And the next day we had a Nobel Ladies Tea, which was a photo op that, and it was Shirin and Wangari and myself, and there were tons of media, and we were whispering with each other about creating an initiative, and told the media at that point to pay, you know, stay tuned. Sometime we'll make some announcement. And since I already knew everybody else, I went and spoke to the other women, and everybody wanted to be part. So I did the seed fundraising, and the best decision of all time, of course, was hiring Liz Bernstein, she was the executive director. She's now co-executive director with Rachel Vincent. Liz and I have worked together since Landmines. I know her inside out. I would trust her with anything. And without Liz, I can say in all honesty, either there would not be a Nobel Women's Initiative, and definitely it would not be the small but mighty entity that we are. I don't believe in, I'm sorry, I can't think of her name, the Facebook lady and Lynne.
Sheryl Sandberg.
Yes, that person who, you know, fully embraced the let's rip them off model. And I don't believe in that. I don't want to lean in to learn how to do things the way men together do things. I don't particularly care for it most of the time. Like in the corporate world, you know, the cutthroat, and where it really is I, me, me, you know. I'm the most important of the corporate leaders. Look at how much my yearly benefits are and my whatever bonus and all that I don't deserve and should go to the people doing the work. I don't believe in lean in. I believe that you bring who you are to the table. And if they don't like who you are, you don't want to be there anyway.
So can I ask you a question then, just
Sure.
on this point? Because I think we live in a world still that has a person getting the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
And you created this powerful catalytic movement, again, pre-internet, as tools, right? And so the amount of energy required is just so much more, you know, having now jumped 2 generations. What was it like in that moment where all of a sudden you're being selected out of the community that was collective in driving forward? Here it is, the world kind of absolutizing individual leadership. How did that work, and how did that feel? What did you do with that?
First of all, any year, a Nobel Prize of any of the disciplines can be given to up to 3 individuals or organizations. And in our case, it was given to me individually and to the campaign as well. But you were right. Immediately, every media outlet in the world only wanted to talk to me. Prior to that, they would talk to deminers when it was about demining. They would talk to amputees when it was about, you know, what is it like to, you know, live without legs and have children and in Cambodia? How do you manage? What do you do? All of a sudden they wanted to talk to me, and I got angry. And I just refused. I said, I don't know. You should go talk to X. Go talk to Y. It's we. You know, I didn't suddenly, as I love to say, become Mother Teresa, but because I have nothing of her personality or desire to be a virginal nun. So I just would not give in to that. I would not allow it to happen. There would be times when we were having meetings, and I remember one time Queen Noor and I were walking into some meeting, and the steering committee was behind me, and I just stopped and said, you know, we are all going in together, or you can go in and I won't. To force people to recognize that no one person changes the world ever. Even, you know, you get your Hitlers, and now we have Donald. They change the world in part because the minions that support them, even knowing that they do not deserve support. We changed the world in the landmine campaign because we worked together with a common vision for a better world for everybody. And I said this when we spoke the other day, you know, I want a better world for everybody, even the people I do not like. And that's where another aspect of my not being Mother Teresa or Archbishop Tutu. There are people I do not like. I never will like them. And Tutu and I have argued a million times. Oh, Jody, you know, there's inner good in everybody. And I'm like, cool. You can love their inner good. I'm going to dislike them for what they're doing to humanity. I just can't go there. I won't do anything to them, although I might wish to. But you have to be working for the good of all.
So hold that just for a second, because that, like, so there's rage, right? That, and you hold that rage as power, as energy, and yet somehow I hear, and please push back, I know you're shy and retiring, you would never do
No.
that, but you don't otherize, right? You can recognize, like, those actions I am going to denounce, and I'm going to stand here until you change, but I'm not going to otherize. I want a world where you too are flourished, hopefully changed by virtue of the advocacy that we as a collective. So how do you hold that? This is, I think, the question of our day right now.
I don't know. It's just always how I have felt. You know, to me, there's a difference between rage and righteous indignation. I grant you that it's a small line to cross. I was at a conference in New Mexico years ago. It was a women's conference, and I was, God knows, ranting about something at the time. And when it came to Q&A, a woman very indignantly proclaimed that I couldn't possibly be a peace activist because I was so angry. And I thought about, I'm sorry to smirk, I can get angry, but that's different from righteous indignation. I had to think about it for a long time, and just said that it was not anger per se. I feel righteous indignation at injustice. I don't care what that injustice is, such as Attorney General Barr sending in unidentified and unidentifiable, you know, soldiers and police, etc., into Washington peaceful protests to clear the way for Donald to go and stand in front of a church with a Bible. Righteous indignation. I mean, that makes me want to scream. But you channel.
So can you define? Sorry, I apologize.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to ask if you could just describe anger, rage versus righteous indignation. Recognizing, I agree, there's that kind of very blurry line. But if you were to be going back and forth, how do you characterize it differently?
Well, one I used to use all the time. My husband has 3, thankfully now, adult children. But when I never wanted children, I knew at 13 I was not cut out for motherhood. And when we first got together, it was, as you can imagine, a little difficult. And the girls, who I love them all now, we're very close, but the girls would like stay here on the weekend and they would get bored. And they would say things like, Jody, can't we go get a mani-pedi? And I'd be like, no. Why? Because we're bored. And I said, I'm sorry you're bored, get a book. You can see that we have bookshelves in every room in this house. I can offer you some that you actually might like. But I'm not taking you shopping. We're not having manis and pedis and spending money unnecessarily because you are bored. That was my anger. And sometimes I'd be quite angry, depending on how much they pushed. Things that make no sense to me can cause me to be angry. But righteous indignation is, how can you look at what has happened in the streets of the United States and not feel righteously angry at the wrong, right? Righteously angry at the wrong, at the injustice, at the... I think that if you don't feel some sort of indignation, your soul is dead or something, maybe in a coma. But, it is what makes change happen. Change doesn't happen just because we want it to. Change doesn't happen because we discuss issues with our friends over a nice glass of wine. That is not a strategy for change. Change happens when you say what you're going to do and you do it. Period.
Say what you do and do it. We're going to take some questions from folks that have written in, but Lynne, I want to give you just given how you're built, right, you have this ability to be with the other and both empathize and, similar to Jody, still recognize. I'm curious, what are you observing kind of in the world right now, and what have you learned from Jody around this?
Gosh, oh, what have I learned from Jody? That would take like a couple hours to even start listing. But what I'll say is that the rising up now, the emergence of what Jody, I love this distinction she's making of righteous indignation and anger, is really inspiring to me. Because the word inspiring, it's inspiriting. It gives you the kind of almost like the spiritual moral power to be at one, not, we are each other. It's not like we're connected. We are each other. And we're seeing that now. And the virus, as horrendous as it is, has made it super clear. It's almost like the pandemic, everybody experiencing something at the same time all over the planet, all 7.6 billion of us at the same time, different levels of impact, yes, but everybody in the same soup, if you will, prepared us, I think, for what's happening now with racial injustice. This has never been you've never felt so much alignment, so much coherence in the United States. The rising up 50 states having demonstrations day after day. My husband Bill was looking at something yesterday that he shared with us about there were people in a park somewhere, he didn't say where, some city, 30,000 people. I mean, all standing up for justice, for Black Lives Matter, for brothers and sisters of color. Just incredible response. We have never seen anything like this. I haven't in my lifetime. The congruence, the coherence. So there's a moral indignation emerging through the human family. And I also was talking to people in Europe. There's demonstrations in Europe for the United States.
Amazing.
So it's almost like the pandemic, all of us being engaged in something together biologically has really, there's no denying the biology. We're one biology. And that one biology has given us one heart, one experience of the oneness of the human family that has given rise, I think, to a kind of movement like no other that is just rising up out of the guts of who we are. So and that's what Jody has taught me. Guts and grace. She's courageous.
That's in grace. That's great.
Stoppable, but it comes from the grace of moral indignation rather than the fight that's against. She's against what's wrong, but she's not against human beings. Even the people, when you said, Jody, you want a better world for even the people you don't like. I'm thinking of someone leading our country right now, a better world for even someone who's making us all so angry. Is that that's an experience of we are each other, rather than you're against people, you're against the actions that are inhumane, that disregard the reverence for life and humanity. So that distinction, I think, is so important right now. I'm so glad you asked that question, Dan. So that's what
So one of the things, so Jody, know the gift keeps on giving, because it's one of the things that Lynne has been a mentor to me on, this both and. So we have a number of questions. Actually, they're kind of beginning to pour in. So we'll try and get through as many. One came in ahead of time, which we asked folks if they are to pay attention, from actually a good friend of mine who lives in Chicago, Ava Youngblood, who was saying, okay, Lynne made this point earlier that independent sector really cares about the health of civil society, so that there is this robust, kind of unique part of American life that can both hold government accountable in business as well as partner where appropriate to create change. But organizations that think about this work, or formal institutions, can be also part of the problem. So talk a little bit about your experience where you see, many of the folks today joining us run institutions or are part of institutions. What are the blind spots you think that we get in the way of or contribute to the problem as opposed to pivot to being, more fully part of the solution?
Well, from my experience, I did not trust almost anyone in any government during the it was pretty hard to trust the US government when it was supporting death squads, training death squads in Salvador. I was actually called into the US Embassy for part of the work I was doing. And the guy actually tried to, this makes me so laugh, tried to recruit me to join the Foreign Service. And I thought, what drugs is this dude smoking, or what the hell? I said, no way, are you kidding? I'm fighting you. But then when it came to the landmine work, we had a pivotal moment when we had to start really reaching out to governments and get them to form a self-identifying group that were going to carry forward negotiations, even when the negotiations in the UN fell apart, which they did. But so Goose, my husband, Steve Goose, Human Rights Watch, Arms Division. So Goose is saying to me, Jody, we have to, we have to accept that some of these government people, have the right intention. And I said, what if they're trying to infiltrate and take us down? Because Central America made me so wary. And he said, what else do we have? So I went along, and it did work out. And there were members of governments from around the world that believed in a ban as much as we did. And for me, taking that huge leap to believing that any of them were worth working with was amazing. Mm. But the blockages, I can think of some of the big organizations that, NGO-ish, that rely so much on their government connections, that rely so much on government money, that they will not do what's right. They will help block change. They will, the blah, blah. We must work with them. At what point are you them? The question is, what point are you them? And you're not facilitating change.
So I want to highlight something. Also, ask both of you in just we're at almost time, like a minute and a half.
I'm so sad. I love this.
So do we. And there's good news on that, which I'm going to tell everybody in just a moment. But I'd love just some parting thoughts. But I just want to, I know you both know this. In the United States, there are about 1.5 million nonprofits, right? And between a fee for service, and government contracts, those are the two biggest income streams. And I think, Jody, what you just challenged all of us to say is how do we both have enough financial and human resources institutionalized, as you pointed out earlier, as being really important, and yet free enough to be able to follow our conscience, to allow the righteous indignation to drive us. So I just think it is we're all living this in this very, this moment right now. So first I'll start with Lynne, then the last word for you, Jody, kind of just parting wisdom you're taking from this conversation.
What am I doing?
Gosh.
Sorry.
You want to go?
No, go ahead. No, I was thinking out loud, unfortunately, sorry.
Okay, I'll just say briefly, I think this time that we're living in, this historic, really reset, I think people are starting to realize, organizations and people and companies but just human beings, that what we want now is, as we go forward, is to be known for what we allocate, not what we accumulate. Mm-hmm. Who are we? That we are people, institutions, organizations that have skin in the game, and that's financial too, for a future that is livable, that has respect for the whole community of life, and respect for one another. And it's going to take money, everybody's resources, everybody's love. Really, the word love, I want to just put that in the picture here, because that ultimately is where Jody finds her power, I think, her love for this world. And that's where we feel our pain, and that's appropriate, and that's where we feel and actually derive our power. So, and that's where philanthropy comes from. It means love of humankind. And that's where, when resources really flow towards love rather than fear. And that we've got to make this pivot financially in every possible way. So I don't know if that's what you wanted me to talk about, Dan, but everybody, especially civil society, one of the things that civil society is so powerful, why it's so powerful, is it's powered by people's love. And that's the current of money coming from love that makes it so powerful.
I want to highlight the role, or the power of civil society comes from love, and money that is the current that unleashes love, power, civil society. Just beautiful. Thank you. Jody, bring us home with your parting thoughts.
Well, I have so many that we'd be here for a few hours, but listening to Lynne talk about philanthropy, I also have trouble with some of the big philanthropic organizations that, instead of listening deeply to the people who are asking for the money and know why they need it and what they will do with it, think that they have the answers. Ergo, if you want some of my money, you're going to do it the way I tell you to. And one thing I love about the Nobel Women's Initiative is we never go to any place where we are not invited by women's organizations and stand with them for some X reason, right? And never walk in and go, here I am, I got the Nobel Prize, peace, peace, love. Let me tell you how to do it. I don't know how you do it in your place, your space. And to me, the arrogance of some of the giant, philanthropy organizations in their belief that they know it all is frightening. And, the mega rich, I'm not even going into that, but that think they have the answers just because they're mega rich is, I can't even describe what it makes me feel. I was going to say you're blessed with this to be in, it's not a blessing because of the warped, greedy systems of this world. You are making $8 million an hour. This is Bezos, of course, while you're not paying your staff sick leave, insurance, whatever. There's something wrong with that system. But if you have all that damn money and you're going to use it, listen to the people who need it. Don't you tell me what I need to do. I don't come into your corporation and say, well, I'd like to. You need to do this, that, and the other, right? But if I have a minute, Nobel Women's Initiative worked with another organization in Canada and pushed and pushed and pushed for a specific fund of $150 million for grassroots women's work. They won. And then in that lobbying effort, they said, please, look to the organizations on the ground doing the actual work. Mm-hmm. And instead, the majority, of course, went to the big organizations that are safe because they're well known. We have to invest in and trust the people in the moment doing the work. It's not that they don't deserve funding, but we were specifically lobbying for the small ones. We work with the group in the Congo, and Congo is beyond, you can't even talk about it.
Can I ask you,
Sorry.
we're at time. The good news is there's going to be more time for this. I just want to stop for a second, go to the balcony, and thank you both for taking the time today. These are the raw, hard conversations civil society needs to be having at scale and wrestling with this. And the courage of you both and your willingness to be fully yourselves, not surprising as I've gotten to know you, Jody, and know you, Lynn, is a gift for all of us as we're moving forward. So thank you. I also want to thank you both because you've stepped into a partnership with Independent Sector and Upswell through the Nobel Peace Prize Women's Initiative to have this ongoing conversation on a monthly basis with your colleagues. We know that Lema Goboe, who received the prize in 2011 for her work ending the Second Liberian Civil War in 2003, will be joining us, as will Shirin Ebadi, who received in 2003 for her amazing work in in Iran. Yep, in Iran, sorry. My computer was just telling me that I had to get moving. So I want to hold a video right now about the Women's Initiative and let folks know to please pay attention to Upswell as we're going to be having these continued conversations with Jody, her colleagues, and then in October have kind of a big confab about what all this meant. Thank you, Jody and Lynn.
Thank you. Thanks, Lynn. It's always a blast.
Thank you. Mwah.